For 40 years, the world feared the Soviets and Americans would go to nuclear war. However, the real danger was not in the 1980s as the collapsing Soviet Union became more paranoid. The most dangerous point in the Cold War was just weeks after World War II ended. Not many people know just how close we came to nuclear war with Stalin. Today we will see just how close these former allies came to nuclear war just weeks after helping each other beat Germany. This is Knowledge Voyage. As World War II came to a close, the power of the Soviet Union was clear to the Western Allies. With its massive manpower, powerful equipment and ruthlessness on the battlefield, the Red Army was a major force. They had proven they could fight anyone, absorb astonishing losses and still emerge the winner. Put simply, they were a force to be reckoned with. The strength and size of the Soviet army had been something the Allies had appreciated during World War II, and Allied propaganda spoke warmly of the Soviet army. Up to 80% of the German army had been absorbed fighting the Soviets, and without this, the Nazis may never have been defeated. But with the war over, the Soviet Union, with its open desire to promote communist revolutions in Western countries and a massive army with which to do it by force if necessary, fear of the post-war Soviet Union's intentions was high. The Soviets had already overrun Eastern Europe, and it became clear that these countries would become Soviet satellites. However, as a globally orientated ideology, many felt communism could never be satisfied with just half a continent under its control. As Allied armies began to demobilize and return home, massive divisions of Soviet troops remained in Europe. This made some analysts think the Soviets were preparing to strike. As the Western Allies and Soviets faced each other uneasily across post-war Europe, some thinkers, such as Churchill, suggested planning for eventual war with their Soviet allies would be wise. This plan for a war with the Soviets was given the codename Operation Unthinkable. The name alone betrays just how fearful the Allies were at the thought of one day having to actually carry it out. Some figures, such as General George Patton, even suggested drafting German troops into the Allied armies to help fight the Soviets in this scenario. Today it seems the Western leaders were just being paranoid about a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. However, it is worth remembering that the idea the Soviets would take advantage of post-World War chaos to invade countries had actually already happened before. At the end of the First World War, the newly formed Soviet Union surveyed the aftermath of post-war Europe. Several empires had been destroyed, and much of the land in Eastern Europe was up for grabs, as newly formed countries tried to grab areas they considered to be theirs. In 1917, Lenin had agreed to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which gave the Kaiser's Germany huge tracts of territory. Lenin signed the treaty to buy time to consolidate his revolution at home. Now the Kaiser's army was defeated and heading home, the territory in Brest-Litovsk was open. Furthermore, many of the states in this region, such as the Baltics and Poland, lacked well-trained armies. The Soviets invaded the Baltic states and then advanced on Poland. In 1920, Lenin and the Soviet security chief Felix Dzerzhinsky believed the Soviet Union should invade Eastern Europe, while the Western Allies were not in a position to intervene. This led to the Soviet invasion of Poland and the Polish-Soviet War. However, the Poles under Marshal Piłsudski managed to defeat the Soviets. This, coupled with the escalating Russian civil war within the Soviet Union itself, led the Soviets to abandon their plans to conquer all of Europe after the First World War. However, now a Second World War had broken out, the leaders of Europe feared the Soviets may attempt it once more. It wasn't just the Allies who were nervous. The Soviets were led by Joseph Stalin, a man with a pathological tendency to see enemies and threats everywhere. This fear and distrust wasn't helped when, in July 1945, the Americans successfully tested the atomic bomb. Truman informed Stalin and other Allied leaders at Potsdam that the bomb was ready for use. According to most witnesses to this announcement, Stalin reacted calmly and congratulated the Americans, but this appears not to have been his true reaction. British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden, who was with Stalin when the news was announced, said Stalin appeared to be a little shaken. Zhukov, writing about the nuclear bomb announcement in his memoirs, said that after the Allied leaders were not present, Stalin had anxiously confronted him about the nuclear bomb. Stalin berated his foreign minister Molotov and said, "We'll have to talk it over with Kurchatov and get him to speed things up." Kurchatov was head of the Soviet atomic bomb research unit, and it has to be said, being informed Stalin thinks you are a slacker is probably not the best news you could ever receive. However, it is clear that the Soviets were intimidated by the Allies' nuclear monopoly. Unlike in the Cold War, where both sides had nukes, the fact only America had them must have frightened the Soviets. This fear would have increased when the Americans nuked not one, but two entire Japanese cities. In addition, declassified materials show that the Americans successfully led the Soviets to believe they had a much larger force of nuclear bombs and long-range bombers than existed in reality. This plan, codenamed Operation Totality, seems to have further persuaded Stalin to leave Western Europe alone. Even if the Soviets were contemplating invading Western Europe, it appears this nuclear monopoly had given them food for thought. There were Allied planners who favoured Operation Unthinkable and its plan of preemptively attacking the Soviets to stop them invading Western Europe. Among them was General George Patton. Patton had even suggested using German prisoners of war in an anti-Soviet army to boost Operation Unthinkable's manpower. His logic was it would help reduce the manpower disparity between the Soviets and Allies, as the Soviets outnumbered the Allies 3-1, and the Germans did at least have experience of Soviet battle tactics. Another partisan of Unthinkable was Winston Churchill, renowned for his staunch anti-communism and his belief in confrontational politics. Churchill had advocated gassing the Kurds in the past and had said that he would be prepared to use chemical weapons against the Germans had they ever successfully invaded Britain. This clearly means that Churchill was okay with weapons of mass destruction use, and he would not have been shy about using nukes against the Soviet Union if needed. However, several things would happen that would weaken Operation Unthinkable politically. Firstly, Winston Churchill lost the British election of 1945. His replacement was avowed socialist Clement Attlee. Attlee's Labour Party also included vast numbers of Soviet sympathisers, as books like Moscow Gold by Paul Anderson and Kevin Davies show. With Churchill replaced by socialists who admired the Soviets, British support for Unthinkable was gone. Furthermore, General George Patton died in a car accident. There is some suspicion surrounding the circumstances of his death which goes beyond this video, but whether his death was an inside job or not, now America's main partisan for Unthinkable was gone as well as Britain's. There was, however, one final thing that meant Operation Unthinkable and its plan of nuclear war with Stalin never went ahead. That was China. The whole point of Operation Unthinkable was to preemptively attack the Soviets to stop them invading Western Europe. However, it would soon become clear Stalin's eyes were elsewhere. On the day Nagasaki was bombed, Soviet troops poured into Japanese-occupied Manchuria in northern China. Going back to the days of the Tsars and Chinese emperors, Russia had viewed Manchuria as a strategically important place. Now the Japanese were on their last legs, the Soviets wanted to take advantage of this. Manchuria was a much more tempting target for the Soviets than invading Western Europe. Western Europe was protected by America's nuclear monopoly, so any attack here would have been very, very casualty intensive. Whilst the Soviets had a strong stomach for mass casualties, even they had their limits. They had lost 20 million men in World War II, and were not going to risk another 20 million dead by attacking Western Europe. Western Europe was protected by the nuclear-armed Americans, and they'd fooled the already unnerved Soviets into thinking the nuclear force was even bigger thanks to Operation Totality. By contrast, Manchuria had only a demoralized and isolated Japanese army protecting it. It was, simply put, a candy store with a busted lock. Manchuria contained many natural resources the Soviets wanted and needed, and it had a well-developed industrial base. It only took the Soviets a few days to overrun Manchuria, and they plundered around $2 billion worth of industrial material. An invasion of Manchuria also made sense for the Soviets because of Chairman Mao. The Soviets believed a communist China was in their long-term interest, and by capturing Manchuria, they could provide Mao's communist armies with a base as they fought the remaining nationalist Chinese. The point was, Operation Unthinkable had been set up in the belief the Soviets were about to attack Western Europe. The fact the Soviets were at the complete opposite other side of the world fighting seemed to prove beyond any doubt that they had no further territorial ambitions in Europe beyond the Eastern European countries they had already taken. In a way, the Allies were right. The Soviets did eventually use the chaos of a World War ending to advance their territory. But unlike in World War I, where they tried this in Europe, in World War II they did it in Asia. This mistrust, of course, never fully went away. And 4 years later, the Soviets finally developed their own nuclear bomb, ending America's exclusive ownership of the ultimate weapon. The Americans and Soviets would spend the next 4 decades nervously sizing each other up, but never actually fighting each other, or at least not directly. However, had things been a little different, then maybe Operation Unthinkable would have gone ahead, and the mushroom clouds would have been formed all over Eastern Europe. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Thank you.